Hello everybody, this is Michael Hollands for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Karl-Walter Lindenlaub, the great cinematographer who shot Universal Soldier, Stargate, Independence Day, Red Corner, Rob Roy, The Haunting, The Jackal, The Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian, One Night at McCool's, The Black Book, Guess Who, and many more. It is my pleasure to welcome Karl-Walter Lindenlaub.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. I really appreciate that. Karl-Walter, as I understand, you studied in Munich and you also did extensive studies in the UK. What was your biggest motivation to break into this great business?
Well, in the beginning, I thought I'm going to end up in journalism. That was my original goal. It was actually a very good program in Munich for journalism. And then I discovered the film school, and then it seemed like documentaries would be more exciting. And I didn't have much experience. I was just doing my civil service in Hamburg, and there was one film class one could do in Hamburg at night, organized by the city, and I did that to get a little foundation at least. And so, as luck had it, I got into the film school right after civil service. I got admitted and started in the documentary department, which at that time was a really niche operation. Documentaries, there wasn't a big platform for it. We had to capture documentaries on film, which made it expensive and complicated, unlike now where you can just grab a digital camera. The forums to see documentaries were mostly late in television, so you had a very small potential audience. And during the first year, and we started thinking about more dramatic stuff, and a little group amongst the documentary students hooked up with some feature students. It was a small program, and a total of 24 students, so 12 documentary students, 12 film directors. We created this kind of group that helped each other out doing our student films. And out of that came for me first opportunities to do some focus pulling on one film. We all tried out different jobs, The best thing about the film school in Munich at that time was that you could actually shoot films. And so we were shooting all year round and learning by doing stuff, and making mistakes and helping each other. And the camera at that time really came easy to me. I didn't have much photographic knowledge, but it really came easy to me, and I really enjoyed it. And then we had a German born cinematographer from England come over to do a workshop. His name is Walter Lindenlaub. He won an Oscar for Alexis Sorba, and he did a short movie with us that we wrote and organized, and I got to operate the camera, and he did the lighting, and that really triggered for me that I wanted to do cinematography, or was really interested in it. And then I did my graduation film as a director in Munich, which was a nerve-wracking experience. I was 23 years old doing a 15-minute movie in Hamburg in 35 millimeter, and I was so nervous and didn't sleep and so stressed out. After that experience, I felt like maybe cinematography is a better way for me to start. I didn't feel like I had enough life experience to start as a director. And then I didn't know enough about studio lighting and traditional cinematography that, in Germany, we had the German Nouvelle Vague kind of people shot on locations. Everything had sort of a very realistic look. And the traditional Hollywood or studio way to work had kind of gone by the wayside with the end of World War II. People didn't really shoot on stages that much, and it wasn't taught really. And at the film school, we didn't even have cinematography. It was sort of self-taught. So I got lucky. I got into the English film school, the National Film and Television School. There was a connection with another student, and they took me in for a year of extra studies. And that was great. I had 2 great lighting workshops there with super famous DPs and learned some stuff that you couldn't learn in Germany at that time. So I think that helped me a lot to work internationally as well later.
You started out in Germany, you have become immensely successful in the United States. If I'm correct, you have been living in the States since 1991. And was Hollywood always on your radar? Have you had this idea to work in the States right from the word go, right off the bat, or has that kind of happened by accident? I know you worked with Roland Emmerich also on his first films, and how did that happen? I know that Universal Soldier was your first movie in the United States. Roland Emmerich directed it. Was Moon 44 basically the reason you were asked to work in the States?
Yeah, Moon 44 was the last film we did with Roland in Germany. Only we had like 1 week in Los Angeles to shoot some locations. And that was kind of a ticket for Roland. You know, it showed that we can compete and that we can do something that could be shown internationally. And then he got a big offer to do a huge movie for Coralco, which was a big independent film company at that time. You know, they did movies like Terminator and big budget extravagances, and kind of shook up the whole independent film market with paying big salaries to movie stars. And so he got an offer to do this big film with Sylvester Stallone, and lucky for me, he insisted on bringing me as a cinematographer. There was a lot of pushback, of course, that we have people here. You can have Jost Vacano, who already worked for them, who's a German cinematographer, or Dante Spinotti here just worked for them. What do you want your guy for? And he insisted on bringing me, and they agreed. And as it turned out, the movie never happened. But then they asked us to do this other film, Universal Soldier, which was in big production trouble and had to be completely rewritten. And I was in Roland's house in Los Angeles in his guest room, and we were prepping Universal Soldier. That's how it started. I had never really thought about living in America or working here, you know, consistently. That seemed completely out of my world anyway. Before I left, I think I had shot 1 film with my partner at that time, Ute Wieland, a drama with Heinz Bennett in the lead. A German drama based on a novel, and I shot Moon 44, and that was kind of what my life was. There were these films that I was personally very interested in, dramatic movies, and then there was genre stuff with Roland, which wasn't really my genre, but you know, that's what Roland did, and he made it really exciting and doable for me. I learned a lot doing these films with him and from him. And once we started working here in Los Angeles, I met my future wife, and that kind of changed it. So it was more like a personal, private decision. Without having met my wife, Lee, I don't think I've ever would have considered living here. You know, America was such a strange culture for me. It was so different from what I was used, and I don't think I could have survived here in Hollywood without somebody on the inside. You know.
Thank you. And before we talk more about Roland and some of the successful movies which you shot, as I understand, you also taught cinematography. You actually also ran classes or did classes on cinematography in Hamburg, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah. I know many people said that actually participating in a class about, you know, music or acting or even cinematography is very educational, but they usually do not contain an element which may also be essential when it comes to the day-to-day operation of running a movie set. Which aspect of the daily work did you find essential but very difficult to communicate?
The film program I was working in was in Hamburg, and it's a small masterclass program. So it's really geared towards people that have experience already. It's a bit like AFI, just smaller, AFI here in Los Angeles. So there's already a a foundation of knowledge when the students start that program. It was very intense. It was a 2-year course, and the way we organized it, and me as the head of the camera department was very practical. I would only teach courses where I either would take a scene from a movie that I had shot, translate it into German, and then have them direct and shoot it. So it was geared towards the cooperation between director and cinematographer, and the work with actors and where to put the camera. And the other stuff was geared towards the cinematography students, and that was always lighting workshops in studio settings. We had a little stage with the interior apartment set where we would work out scenes with actors, stand-ins to simulate dramatic situations for movies. I mean, basically, what you want to teach people is an arsenal of tools, right? You want to increase that toolbox because every project is different and asks for different solutions. And the more you have a foundation in your craft, the easier it is to react to it, and the more you can express yourself. So I think that's the technical part is something you can teach, and you can certainly constantly create problems that need to be solved, because that's really what we do in filmmaking. And then how people really deal with it, that's a personal journey that everybody in the arts has to go through, right? You learn to get better with your brush strokes, and then hopefully you can put on the canvas what you want to see and what you want to say. But how you get there and what comes out at the end, that's really up to the individual. And that's a journey that's a lifetime occupation, isn't it? That's something you always have to work on.
Michael Ballhaus, one of your famous peers, the late great Michael Ballhaus, I should say, once said that he wasn't even that interested in technology and that side of the business, but his main motivation or goal was always storytelling and how to tell a great story. What could you tell me about that? How do you feel about this statement, and how would you verbalize it?
Yeah, I think you don't want technology to get in the way of storytelling. It's supposed to support it, right? I mean, every cinematographer has to learn how to do the lighting and how to expose film. Let's say in the originally when we started out, it was film. Now it's digital. Then we had to learn how to transform our film knowledge into digital pixels. But at the end of the day, you look at an image and you have to say, is this the right image for the story? So I totally agree with Michael. There are people that are very technically inclined. They have this engineer's kind of mind, and they also have maybe an artistic side that can use all that knowledge and work and create beautiful images or the right images for the story. There's so many different ways of doing this job, and nowadays it's gotten a little bit too easy to get an image. When we started out, there was no video playback. All you had was that film camera. You put that film in with a magazine, and we all started operating ourselves in the beginning on the smaller projects. You look through the viewfinder, the shutter moves very fast, and through that shutter you could kind of see that you had the right exposure, because if that image had a certain brightness, you knew you were overexposed, or got the dark was under. You could kind of see it because it was a mirror reflex system. You had the same image that the film was seeing. But was the film really seeing the same thing? Was it getting that information? Was there something exposed? It was incredible, scary. And then you shoot big night exteriors. The biggest nightmare is always that there's nothing on the film. And that, of course, would be a horrendous mistake, and you would get fired. So we all have our nightmares as cinematographers. With the invention of video playback, and then with the introduction of digital capture systems and these new digital cameras, you can actually, if you have a calibrated environment where the monitor is really set up properly, you can see exactly what you're getting. So those sleepless nights are behind me. for most of us, because you can see it right there on the set. And there's a lot of new technology that helps you to work faster, which is not really my preference, but that's how it is nowadays. We have dimmer systems on everything, and we have much smaller lights, and so technology is constantly changing. I'm not even somebody who's super sad that we don't shoot film anymore, as much as I enjoy it. I think it's just the story of human evolution. Things change all the time. Now we're having here our conversation from Los Angeles to Germany on Zoom. 30 years ago, we could have had a phone conversation. Yeah. So I think people don't forget that things are changing all the time. Then there's no way to stop that, from happening. That's part of our life. So you have to embrace it as a filmmaker. You have to use the technology to make your work better, hopefully.
Yeah. And 30 years ago, the phone conversation would have been rather expensive.
Yeah, exactly. We had little phone cards with a special code to get a reduced rate for international calls. And you look 100 years back, people immigrated to the United States. Every couple of months, maybe a letter would arrive. That's how you communicate.
Yeah, technology has made certain aspects much easier, but in terms of shooting a movie, and when you, let's say, reflect on the scenes which used to be shot in camera all the time versus, relying on CGI effects and so on and so forth, would you say that perhaps Hollywood and the whole industry these days relies a bit too heavily on effects? Would that be a fair assessment on my end?
I think it totally depends on the filmmaker. You have the whole spectrum. You have people like Chris Nolan, who tries to do as much as he can in camera and insist on shooting film. Even Oppenheimer, which some other person would have shot in, Super 16, maybe he shoots in IMAX. That's a very, small scale film with a big story. There's so many different ways to do the same thing. Yes, I think there's still something to be said about doing things in camera, doing them real if you can. When I started out with Roland, we shot our own models. We shot always a lot of model photography, miniature photography, to be incorporated into the live action. That has gone by the wayside with digital, and I think it really depends on who's doing it. Who are the people that are doing the effects? It can be an incredible, powerful tool. It can open up worlds that you could never see otherwise, or it can be something very artificial and annoying, unnatural. Again, it's not something you can just ignore. It's there, and hopefully it helps. When we start a film, I'm on 2 projects right now in preparation with a German director for the first time in many years, and one is a little mystery horror film, sort of Hitchcock type. And there's certain things that happen in a house, looking out the window, what happens in the backyard, and there's no way we can do all that in camera. It would look, in that case, it would look really hokey. It would look like an old silent movie, where people make shadows with their hands. So we will definitely have some digital tools to help us out there.
What was a career-defining moment for you, either in terms of the collaboration with a director or a certain shot or sequence of a film which you managed to pull off successfully?
That's hard to say, because every project you feel like somebody will find out how little you know and you're going to get fired. It took me a long time to accept that I actually kind of know what I'm doing. When you come out of film school, you think you know so much, and then you get your first 90-minute movie. That's a big step, sure. But I really have to think hard. Night stuff is always the scariest. Daylight, in a way, in the beginning seems a little easy, because yes, you have a base level of illumination. Doing big night stuff in cities on film, that was a hard thing, because you had to try and make it look real, but definitely light your actors, hide the lights, and cover bigger areas, do a lot of planning. You learn all the stuff by doing, really, and figure it out as it gets bigger. And then for me, there's things like in the beginning, we lit from windows, let's say. I don't want to get too technical with lighting now, but everybody understands in day and sometimes at night as well, there's light coming into a window that gives you a natural light source. In the beginning, I was just happy to hit the actors with the light from the window, and I knew I could shoot. And then you add a little ambient light inside, and fine, great. And you had many lights outside the window trying to avoid double shadows, but the window was the source. And then much later, I realized that window light can be lots of different things, and the sunlight can actually miss people all the time, which it does in reality. When you look in your room, the sun moves during the day. It doesn't perfectly hit me here at the desk, it might hit a spot there on the ground, and then that light bounces back from that spot on the ground and creates a different color and a different texture. And then there's soft ambient light from the sky. And how can you translate that into lighting when you have to emulate it artificially? So I learned a lot by doing, and I realized that the sunlight doesn't really have to hit the actors. And shadow is much more interesting than sunlight, direct sunlight. In the shadow, you have much prettier colors. Does that help the answer? I don't know.
Right, thank you.
But that kind of describes the journey you make as a cinematographer. You figure stuff out by trying it out, seeing the result, looking at it and figuring out, wow, this actually worked. Or I'm never going to do that again. That was horrible. Let me find out something else. And you're not alone. I mean, that's the other thing. I learned early on, filmmaking is a collaborative effort. And in film school, you talk each other's heads off, and you fight with each other. And the less you know, the more stubborn people are, and the more difficult it is to work. But as you get better, and you surround yourself with people that you choose to work with, you get a collection of all that knowledge. The collective mind on a movie set is amazing. And if you treat people well, you get a lot of feedback from them without them questioning everything. I'm not saying they should discuss everything, but you're not alone solving the problems. Whenever I have a new lighting set, I like to have a conversation with the people that I'm working with about what we're about to do. And then hopefully somebody comes up with some helpful suggestions as well. And you can use that. As directors can as well. I mean, every good director hires really top people, the best people he can get, because he will look better at the end. His movie will be better. It's beneficiary for everybody.
At the end of the day, it's all about trial and error, trying to make things work. And you mentioned the nightmare scenario of getting fired. And I would like to ask you, you've been around for so many years and you don't have to answer that question, but have you ever been taken off a project, or have you ever gotten close to being fired, or let's say, have you ever been in serious trouble because of a mistake you made, if I may ask that? I think that's also, it may be interesting or essential for younger DPs to learn about that.
Yeah, I don't think people get fired because of one mistake. It's much more complex. There is a tendency to get rid of cinematographers when a movie is in trouble. So I have replaced colleagues a few times. Most of the time it was because I knew the director anyway, and a project had problems, serious problems, and they decided to make a change and find somebody else to shoot, a different director of photography. And then you get that phone call. That's one side of that coin. The other side, I haven't been fired myself. There's one movie I don't really want to talk about. That wasn't a great experience, where under different circumstances I might have left. I would have just said, it doesn't work out. Let's find a solution here and replace me, because I was so unhappy. That can happen too. At the end, I think it's more a question of how the director and the cinematographer work together. And if that collaboration is not working out, if they argue it and don't trust each other, it really poisons the atmosphere on the set. And that's terrible for everybody. And if people don't trust the cinematographer, they have to, actors have to trust you. They they act their hearts out in front of everybody. They do all these very personally revealing things, and if they don't feel safe in that space for whatever reason, because the atmosphere is not safe, or because people are questioning what the photography is, am I looking good enough, am I looking right, is it, they need to be protected. So that's a big part of my job, and that happens too. Actors get cinematographers fired. On my first big studio movie, that was right before Up Close and Personal, before Independence Day, it was Up Close and Personal with Robert Redford and Michelle Pfeiffer. I was in my early 30s. I had just done Stargate, which did really well, and I got this call to DP that film. But the actors had DP approval right. It was in their contract. So they had to agree that I got hired, which was a big step. And I had to deal with their makeup artists on the set every day. In the Hollywood system, it can happen that the personal makeup artist who is just doing the makeup for that movie star is really checking every setup, every new camera setup. And if they feel like the lighting is not advantageous for the actor, they might say something. And it's not insulting and degrading, but it's definitely there. There's a certain pressure. It's like, hey, don't you want to put a better filter in there? Make it a little softer. Did you see this thing under the eye? Those little pushes. And that's something you have to learn how to deal with. That's definitely can be part of the system here.
That can certainly add a tremendous amount of pressure. So let me summarize. So Up Close and Personal, which is a film that I love, Jon Avnet directed it. It stars Michelle Pfeiffer and also Robert Redford. And these two had a contractual right to approve whichever DP gets hired. In this case, you.
Yeah. So that's what I was told, yeah.
Amazing.
And, they were really nice with me. And I took good care of Michelle. I had this special kind of a soft tube on a light over the camera that was helpful with her, and I tried to make her look great without making the movie look flat. I tried to balance the portrait photography with the surroundings so it wouldn't look artificial. And it was a bit of a Pygmalion story. Redford was not a young man anymore. There was a love story where an older man falls for a younger woman and helps her career. So I think it was probably the last romantic lead that Redford did. So that put a little pressure on me. He was amazingly friendly to me. It was all great, but they used their makeup people to to take care of the other side. That's just part of the system. And then my job in dailies. We used to watch film dailies every day after rep or in the lunch period when you're in the studio, and some actors would just come and sit there. That can happen too if they're allowed, or definitely the makeup people are sitting there and they tell their actors what happened the day before. So yes, that was definitely an adjustment for me.
Wow.
But on the other side, I think at the end of the day, the audience looks at the actors. I always tell film students and young cinematographers when I'm teaching as well, you have to light faces. It's easy to light a room and let actors walk around in it, but unfortunately the way film language plays out in the editing, 80% is in medium shots and close-ups. So that's where you look at people very closely, and that's where as a cinematographer you have a huge responsibility. And I'm not saying you have to make them look perfect all the time. That would be really wrong for certain stories, for sure. But you have to protect their acting and their persona as well. Their character.
Okay. Very interesting. And do you think that actors in Germany would have the same kind of power or clout to actually have that put in their contract?
I doubt it. No, absolutely not. It's a little more casual anyway. When you start doing these bigger studio movies here, not only did we have for dramatic movies quite a bit of time, we also had lots of equipment. We could do kind of whatever we wanted technically. And they had a lot of things that in Europe are not standard. They have bigger trailers that, the famous pop-out trailer, you park them somewhere in the city and then the sides pop out. So they have more space inside. It's all a matter of, it's a system here of agents and lawyers and power. And power gets quantified in salary and perks, extra. Do I get a private plane to fly to New York, or do I get, this is how it goes. Do I get my own personal driver? When you shoot with English actors or German actors, they don't even leave the set. They just sit there in a chair and watch you do your stuff, and they might want to stand in for their own work. We have stand-ins for every main speaking part that you have it for lighting. In Germany, that's a hard thing to explain to a production manager that you need that. Yeah. So there's differences, and a lot of them are just purely economically motivated.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating on that. And if I'm not mistaken, you did 2 movies with Jon Avnet, Up Close and Personal, and also Red Corner. And those 2 movies are very performance-oriented, especially also Richard Gere in Red Corner, which I think is one of his best parts. And I like him as an actor anyway. So how would you discuss with Jon the approach you would take, and as to how difficult it may be to capture these performances?
I think those kind of films, you probably won't have something like a storyboard. You would have extensive rehearsals. That's really part of the work. And do the blocking, the positioning of the actors in the room, work that out, and then figure out how to shoot it. And with Jon, he did have some shot lists, but I don't think we followed them completely. So there's a lot of stuff you do while you're on the set that you work out with the actors and then with the director, figuring out where to put the camera and how to put the performance on the screen. We shot a lot 2 cameras, which is, for European, in Europe not very common, in America very common. That's a trickier thing for a cinematographer, because lighting doesn't look good from every angle. You light from one angle, so a lot of times if I have to shoot 2 cameras, I shoot them really close together so you can cut from a medium shot to a closer shot and sort of have a very similar image. I don't like when the big cameras rolling around on the side somewhere, grabbing stuff that I can't control. So, and then you have people like Redford or Michelle, or let's say Richard Gere. It's very gratifying to see them work, and to come up with stuff, because they always offer stuff up. They're really in it for the story and want to do great work. And they're smart. They have done it before.
Yeah.
I did 2 films with Richard. That was actually after Independence Day, and I was happy to do more dramatic work and wanted to get away from these, blockbuster event movies. And we did Red Corner and The Jackal with Michael Ken Jones directing. We did that back to back. So I spent a whole year with Richard. He's a good man.
We mentioned Universal Soldier, which was the first American film. How quickly did you have to adapt to the American way of working? As Mario Kassar also produced the film. It was released through Carolco, which you mentioned before. So Mario Kassar and Andrew Vanya, they were the executives on that picture. So how different was that environment when compared to Germany?
I mean, from the movies I'd done with Roland before, this was just a natural progression, really. And we were saving them from a huge mistake. They had hired a director that prepped for, I don't know, a year or something, spent a ton of money. Originally, the story took place on some oil platforms in the ocean when we got the script. And then we did it more like a mix between European film and American film. Roland and I went on a trip to Arizona, looked at Route 66 and Hoover Dam, at a lot of locations, and then a young actor, friend of Roland's, Dean Devlin, who then became his producer. And Roland sat down and took those location pictures and wrote a story around those locations. So it was all custom designed for that. And they came up with this idea to put this laboratory in Universal Soldier on a truck, so that truck could move around. That gave us the freedom to move as well. Originally, I think they had $20 million and we could use half of it because the other half was already spent. So it wasn't a big budget, even in those days. And the two actors who were more like action performers than actors, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren, they both got $1 million, which I thought was an horrendous amount of money. And they both got a 40-foot trailer with a gym. Each of them had their own gym so they could bulk up. Things were so absurd for me coming from Europe. I was like, what is going on here? So they had their trailers that moved around with us, around Arizona, everywhere. So they could work out and then, pump up before a big scene where they had to take their shirt off. It was pretty absurd. For me, the story was too violent. I hated all that bloody stuff. But we had a second unit with a very, very experienced second unit director, Vic Armstrong, who used to be a stunt double himself. He did all these Harrison Ford movies with Spielberg. He did the Indiana Jones stunt double in the beginning and stuff. And he was so cool and so mellow, smoking a cigar, sitting there. So what do you want? How many beats do you want? And he would do some of the ugly stuff. And his brother worked with him. He was also stunt coordinator. They did the big chase scenes. And what I learned is, that's maybe interesting, when you do big action driving sequences, it's actually better to shoot the wide stuff, the second unit stuff first. Because what we do then as the first unit, we shoot all the close-up driving stuff. But the wide stuff, when the trucks gets chased along the edge of Grand Canyon, that's second unit. The first unit doesn't have the time to do all that. And then you match the closer work of the actors into the wide shots, so it feels like it really is organic. A lot of it is poor man's process, done really cheaply with like moving lights outside and not even back projection or green screen. So same with that school bus that tips over. And then we shot our own models like we always did. We threw like a bus down a little cliff and shot with 3 cameras in high speed, things like that. Yeah. So, it was a very challenging shoot. I mean, the hardest thing was we had 6 weeks of nights and rain and stuff that we had to do. And, night work is hard anyway. And to do it over such a long period, your whole rhythm goes upside down. And then you're in some little motel room in Arizona trying to sleep at 100 degrees temperature during the day and then work all night. It was good that we were young those days.
Lovely. Yeah. Wow. Challenging circumstances, to say the least. And I'm also interested in second unit work. And I also know that not every director, depending on the circumstances, uses a second unit. As I understand, Christopher Nolan tries to avoid that because he has the time or the money to do it, or I don't know the circumstances behind that. But I also know that the degree of involvement of the second units can vary from project to project. Sometimes it's stunt work, sometimes it's just a couple of action scenes here or there. And what was it like on pictures such as Independence Day or Universal Soldier, those huge productions?
Yeah, I mean, on movies like that, with that elaborated action scenes, it becomes an economic question. On Independence Day, Roland was the producer on the show, so he guaranteed the completion of the whole project for a certain amount of money. In order to do that, we had to have a second unit to be able to finish the film. So the second unit shot actually the same amount of days that we shot on the first unit. And a lot of times they had to come into sets that I had already lit and then do some more work in it. Then you have a sequence where cars, blow up in the air and topple over and people chase down the street. We might shoot Jessica Fox running into a tunnel and hiding into a little cupboard as the flames rush by. with the first unit, but then all the other people that sit in cars that the audience don't know who they are, but they're people in the city and things happen to them. That would be second unit. There was no other way to do that film for us under the circumstances. Do I like it? Not really. I mean, when you do a film, you always think you could have done it better. The typical thing is you watch the dailies of the second unit and go like, why did you do that? Why didn't you do that? That happens to the director and that happens to me as a cinematographer. And then funny enough, by now, I feel like a lot of times all these worries are uncalled for. You watch the stuff cut together and you're like, nobody will know the difference. A lot of it is in your head as well. There's stuff that a second unit can certainly do for you, and it all depends on the project. I've done a lot of action myself, complicated stuff, helicopter stuff, big explosion stuff. It gets very technical. If you give me a choice, do I rather shoot an action sequence or a dramatic sequence? I'd rather shoot a dramatic sequence.
And previously, you mentioned the miniature sets.
Yeah.
I think many of Independence Day also contained quite a few sequences in that department, especially the destruction of the city when the first skyscraper is being destroyed by the spaceship. So there was a lot of many practical effects there, right?
Yeah, a lot. We had a whole blocks and blocks of New York built on a soundstage in a big scale. In model work, the bigger the scale, the more realistic the result is, the more it looks like real buildings and real cars. There was almost a year of motion control work where they shot all these big sequences with the computer steered camera system where you shoot 1 or 2 frames per second, and it was really tedious and complicated. Roland had 2 young cinematographers from Germany do it. One of them, and at first I became a director afterwards, so I worked with later as a director as well. So blowing up the White House, everybody has seen that. That was a big model. They shot that, and we just visited. We came by for the explosion, but they had it all set up already. And in those days, that was shot on film, so it was really tricky to work out these big. When you shoot a couple of 100 frames per second, you needed very special gear for it. It's very stressful because it's not something you can just repeat. You blow it up, it's gone.
Yeah, and if you mess it up for whatever reason, you simply have to rebuild it. Yeah, and that takes time.
But you had specialists that really knew how to blow things up in scale. You had to find the right mix of explosives, and then you get real debris and real stuff. It does add certain natural realism to it. That's hard to do. Small clouds, all that stuff, explosions. It's great if you can do it with miniatures. Yeah.
Of all the films you've done with Roland, which film would you say was the most difficult or ambitious one?
Yeah, Independence Day for sure. That was the hardest. Stargate was the most fun.
How so?
We started with this crazy crew that we had worked with before. Everybody was young and ambitious. Nobody was in the union. The budget was relatively high. And we built our own world out there in the desert. Like, he said, we're going to build a road here. Roland could always imagine big worlds. I mean, he has a fantastic mind for production design and for cinematic images. And they found this spot out there in the desert, and they said, we're going to build a road here, and there will be the pyramid. And you can look at this. It was a place where people could do off-road riding, with motorcycles and quads and jump around and do crazy stuff. And we built this sort of Egyptian sci-fi world out there. It was crazy. And then we had Irish construction people for some reason. They had done work for Spielberg and George Lucas with this pipe system. They built the road of Nagada, this township there. We had a road into the dunes at 110 degrees for months and months. They built those sets there. And, it was just amazing to see what we could come up with and do. And then when we came back to Los Angeles to shoot interiors in some warehouse, We all got in the union because the budget was so high. The union came down on us and said, "Hey, you're in Los Angeles. You guys gonna get in the union?" We said, "Sure, we want to be in the union." We watched dailies. The whole crew watched in Arizona. We were in these motels at nighttime. We would have a projectionist. He was employed to show the dailies, and then the whole crew would show up and watch dailies. We would have pizza and beer and be excited about what we'd done there. That was great. We did a picture, I think I still have it somewhere, where everybody brought a flag of their home country, and I think we had about people from 40 different countries working on that movie. So it was a great spirited crew experience, and the actors were fun. It was good.
I think Independence Day was the last picture he worked on with Roland. Correct me if I'm wrong. May I ask you as to why you stopped working as his DP?
Well, at that time, my wife was pregnant doing Universal Soldier, doing Up Close and Personal Independence Day. The baby came during the shoot, our son Nicholas, and I was at a point where I wanted to do some different stuff, and I think Roland was at a point to try some other people out as well. I later worked with Jan de Bont, who had done a lot of Paul Verhoeven movies, and he said to me, "Hey, why are you even worried about it? Every relationship has a certain cycle." I think we both reached a point where we were done with that. We didn't hate each other, but I think we wanted to do other things. And I think Roland had a movie planned to do Godzilla, and I had some offers to do some other stories. And Godzilla, I didn't know much, obviously, about commercial filmmaking. Godzilla was not something I thought should be done as a big budget movie. I thought this should be a little trashy. What I knew about Godzilla was these sort of handmade little horror movies. Little did I know that Marvel would become the future of Hollywood.
Yeah.
But that's how filmmaking changed. That's how Hollywood changed. And the B movies became the A movies. The industry changed completely.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of films I did would never be made anymore for that budget as a feature film. They would end up on some streaming device. And it's a very transitional world we live in here. What I do. You always get very close to people, and Roland and I, we grew up together in film school. I know his parents, I know his parents' house, I know his whole background. We lived together in the same house for a while. We went through the whole crazy beginning in Los Angeles with riots and earthquake and what have you. I mean, we've seen a lot together. But in general terms, you get very close to people on a film for a couple of months, and then you go home again. And other than Facebook, you might never communicate with them again. And you might never be on the same schedule again. Another job comes, you have to take it, or you want to take it, and that takes you away again. A lot of times it's not at home, it's in some distant places. So it's really hard to keep consistency there. Even though I do think that the collaboration between a director and cinematographer gets better if they work more than once together. There's a certain amount of trust and willingness to help each other and bring out the best in each other. That is really helpful. You can see that with great director DP couples, like Bertolucci and Storaro, or Scorsese had a couple of relationships. One of them was Michael Ballhaus, where the work just really benefits from it, and it's a great place to start with if you know each other that well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to talk about Michael Caton-Jones. We mentioned him previously. You did 3 pictures with him. Rob Roy was the first. You did, City by the Sea, and of course the Jackal also. And as I understand, you had come in quote unquote late on Rob Roy because you also replaced the DP. I think Roger Deakins was initially hired. And did you have to kind of go back to the drawing board? Did you have to reshoot everything, if I may ask?
Well, Michael and I went to film school in England. We did a film in England at the film school together that we both wrote together, and then got some extra financing. It was a big, ambitious project for the film school at a time. and we became friends. So then his career took off very quickly, and we sort of met up again in Los Angeles, where by that time I had settled with Roland. And then when Michael got Rob Roy, I was busy on another project. I was in Mexico shooting a Tom Berenger, Barbara Hershey movie for the same producer that we had done Stargate with. And I couldn't leave. Michael was like, hey, you got to come. We got the green light. We got this. And I actually had suggested that he hire Roger because I really like Roger's work. And then, as it turned out, the two of them didn't get along at all. There was a lot of things that didn't work out on the set. And it's far away, it's in Scotland. So it was a complicated situation. And then they put a lot of pressure on me to come in and take this over. I first refused, and then I was told, if you don't do it, somebody else will do it. So it was a very unfortunate situation. I did reshoot a bunch of things, but I think Roger Deakins, obviously his career speaks for himself. So. But Roger has a certain way to work, and Michael wanted a different way to work. That can happen, And Roger is not somebody who wants to change what he does, really. He's done certain things his way his whole life. He always operates usually the camera himself. He didn't like Steadicam, and there were a lot of things. He didn't like anamorphic lenses. And look, he's done amazing work doing all that, so he must know something.
Yeah.
That can happen. That's when you sometimes the chemistry is just not right, and people have different expectations of how to do things.
Which challenges did you have to face on pictures such as Rob Roy, which features amazing landscape shots and just a wonderful cinematography?
Well, Rob Roy was a movie entirely shot on location in Scotland. We didn't have a studio. We had some equestrian roof, sort of like a protected area where horses could run. That was one area. And then we had, at a different place, we had some whiskey distillery warehouses where we could put a farmhouse interior. The weather in Scotland is really tricky. It's changing by the minute too. So to get certain sequences, there's a scene where Liam Neeson and Jessica with the children walk up a hill and then have a conversation about honor and I think some lovemaking. It's out in the open, and Michael wanted that absolutely romantic, so it had to be backlit sunlight, and to find a day where we could do that was not easy. The trickiest part was we did a scene, a big party where the village has a big gathering and they dance. It's nighttime, big fire. We set it up in our little village set outside of town, and a big rainstorm came in. And you have people in period costumes with wigs and makeup and what have you. And the rain comes, everybody is looking for shelter. We got one shot off, and then it started raining and we couldn't shoot anymore. And at that point, the producer made a decision that we're not doing this again. He said, we're going to build this inside this equestrian horse place there, horse center, where we, then had to recreate that village square with forced perspective, because we couldn't build all the houses. We just had 2 or 3 houses. And then in the background, we had some cutouts, and it was almost like model photography, like in a Wes Anderson movie when the horizon is not the real horizon. There was stuff like that. But, we had a top crew from London with support from Scotland, amazing scenic painters that could paint backings, landscape and stuff. So some stuff could be recreated and done close-up. Sometimes, we shot close-ups against a hand-painted backing with some smoke in the foreground for the fog and let the rest go out of focus. Yeah, I definitely had to pull a lot of stuff out of my head there. But it was a good shoot. The people were happy to be there. It was an amazing script. It's probably one of the absolute best scripts I've ever worked on. Normally in Hollywood, every script gets rewritten. We have this funny system of rainbow colors. Every time you get new pages, they get a different color, so you know what color you're on, what changes are the newest changes. On Rob Roy, we didn't change anything. we didn't have rewrites. We shot the script, really. That was quite extraordinary.
And that's a rarity in this field.
Totally. It never happened to me again.
And an amazing movie, also great music there by Carter Burwell. I would love to talk about Paul Verhoeven. You mentioned his name before. He also happens to be one of my favorite filmmakers, and he was once described by composer Jerry Goldsmith as the perfect collaborator. And they did many films together. Would you agree with Jerry Goldsmith's statement that he is indeed the perfect collaborator? And if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Paul is probably one of the smartest directors I've ever seen or worked with. And once he trusts you, he's great to work with. He's very analytical. He's got these thick glasses on, and when he looks at you, you feel like he's looking right inside of you. Yeah, for me, that was one of the most challenging movies I've ever done, if not the most challenging in terms of mental strength, because it's a tough subject, which is what I embraced and liked about it, but it also made it hard, obviously. There's scenes in there where Carice van Houten gets tortured by the Dutch people, and you were like, wow, this is, you lose sleep over that stuff. It's not images you just get out of your head at night. But Paul was amazingly inclusive in the prep. His assistant and me, we had this little rental car, like a tiny little European car, and we drove up and down Holland, which you can do in a few hours, to find the right locations. And Mita, his assistant, was driving. Paul was sitting in the back, and then he had always a notebook, and he draws. He has a pencil and, just a 2B pencil and this little notebook, and he makes drawings. So it's not really storyboards shot by shot, but he definitely draws out sequences. And the mood alone in those drawings gives you a great inspiration of how to do stuff. And he's definitely somebody who doesn't compromise. I mean, I was blown away how persistent he was. We showed a sequence with a sailboat for the beginning of the story where Carice meets this young Dutch guy, and she's sunbathing there. And this little sailboat comes along, and the weather hit us, and we had to abandon ship basically and hide for cover and move somewhere else because of the schedules that the sequence wasn't finished. And I said to Paul, hey, why don't we do this when we shoot the other water stuff at the end? But it was a different part of Holland. One was in the north and the other was in the south at the Belgian border. He said, no, that'll never match. It doesn't look the same. I said, well, we can cheat, we did already some wide shots. He was totally relentlessly insisting, we're going to go back there where we're on that day, and we're going to repeat the sequence and finish it. And that's kind of how he was. There was only one way to do it right. And you need to have a lot of strengths for that, and I think that's part of him. That's what good filmmakers have, that desire to do things absolutely right, and this conviction to tell everybody else, no, I need this, I really need to do it this way, which is hard because there's always money problems. On Black Book, it was hugely difficult for a Dutch production to pull that movie off. It was way too expensive for what they were used to do, and it took them a while to pay everybody's bill. At the end they did, but European film financing is a whole other chapter. Anyway, I think Paul is amazing. He trusted me with finding the right lenses, but he was very good in doing shots, sort of like a Polanski or Hitchcock. He really uses the camera to tell his story. It's not like actors can just walk wherever they want and then we capture the performance. He knows exactly what shot he wants for what part of the scene, and he makes the actors to see it his way. So, they love him. But it's again, there's so many different ways of telling a story and doing a movie. And he definitely is a very deliberate director, who has certain shots for certain scenes that he wants to see exactly that way. And then I can do the lighting. That's my department. But I wish we could have done another movie. Unfortunately, for a while, he couldn't get financing in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. He was a bit in movie jail. And I was hoping that Black Book would have changed it, but it apparently didn't. And then he it took many years. We went for dinner and he came to the house. We stayed in touch. And then he had a project in France. And in France, he had to hire French crew because of the French financing system. And so we didn't work together again. I was very sad about that.
If I may ask, how do you gain somebody's trust, or how did you get Paul to trust you? You know, because he's so rigid about certain things. How did you make that happen?
Well, I mean, partially, of course, people look at what you've done before. Paul had worked with Jan de Bont for Carolco when we arrived here. They were doing Basic Instinct, I think, at that time.
Yep.
And I visited Jan on the set to ask him some questions about camera and Panavision lenses and stuff. And so there was already a connection there. And before I did Black Book, I had shot a movie with Jan de Bont, and he knew Jan like I know Roland. You know, they had spent many, many years together. So that alone gave a platform. You know, we're both from Europe. Northern Germany, where I come from, culturally is pretty close to Holland, I think, closer than to Bavaria. So we already had a lot of things that we could relate to. And then, you know, I think you have to really listen to what people have in mind. With Paul, he has enough to say. It's interesting enough to have conversations with him. We did talk about violence. That was interesting to me because I was saying things like, well, sometimes I feel like you don't have to really dwell on the blood and the violence. And he said, but that's exactly wrong. You have to show what it is. Otherwise, if you cut away, it's much worse. Then it's in your head and you make it much bigger than it. So he really has and you know, that's his Dutch background as well. Holland is very up front. There, a lot of times the living room faces the street, and they have no curtains. It's open. It's a very frank and open culture, even more so than Germany, I think. That's part of it. And he believes that the dark side of humanity is not something you shy away from. He shows that stuff. Same with sex and erotic. Nudity or something is not something. We had a scene with Waldemar, what's his name, who played the Nazi guy, when he goes naked to the bathroom and pees. And Paul was really because he has this engineer's mind. He was really interested in that we can see how he pees. I mean, I'm not showing his penis in that case, but he wanted the urine go into the into the toilet. So they made this little contraption that he could activate so there would be enough coming out.
I remember that scene. Actually, you know, I was trying to rewatch as many of your movies as possible, and I also tried to rewatch Black Book, the whole movie, but I just made it through the first hour, you know, just, you know, a couple of hours ago before I started putting on the finishing touches of that interview, and that was one of the scenes which I also watched, and it does contain some elements of nudity also when he enters the room and he's basically like, you know,
right there in your face.
Yeah, buck naked. Of course, in Europe, it's not that big of a deal. Also, the sexual images on screen are not that big of a deal. In America, it's a whole different story. And of course, you know, when Paul did Basic Instinct 30 years ago, it did stir up quite the controversy, and but you know, in his mind it's totally okay. And also the violent aspect of his film, you know, movies, if you watch, you know, RoboCop or Starship Troopers, you know, Total Recall, those are quite violent, and he would butt heads many times with the MPA.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's partially, I think, as an artist, you provoke as well. You know, by provoking things, you get a reaction, and that reaction is part of the deal. Things like RoboCop or Starship Troopers, for example, is a completely misunderstood film by many people. You know, there's a very serious story behind that, and that's Paul. You know, Paul believes that you have to, and I totally agree with that. Movies have the power to really engage an audience in a way that hardly any other medium has. Maybe video games nowadays, you know, I don't do video games, but you get completely pulled into something if it's done right. And that gives you enormous power to tell a story. And he always feels like You have to entertain people. For Black Book, he said to me in the beginning, this can never be boring. We have a lot to tell. It's a big story. It's a lot to tell. But we don't have time for big crane shots because it just takes too long. Not setting it up, but just in the screen time. And it can never be boring. And I like that. I think if you can put a serious message about humanity inside a very entertaining movie, you cover a lot of bases, And in a way, Chris Nolan tries that too. If you watch like Oppenheimer now, how can people watch a 3-hour talking heads movie? And they do, because he makes it interesting.
If we still have some time left, I would also like to talk about Jan de Bont. He used to work with Paul Verhoeven, as we just established. He was his DP on Basic Instinct, for instance. And Jan is a very interesting cinematographer and also a director. Sadly, he didn't get to make as many films as a director as he probably hoped to make, but there is certainly interesting material there. And you had the chance to work with him on The Haunting, which happened to be the remake of the 1963 classic. How did that come about, and the whole collaboration with Jan, and how you perceived the remaking of this great classic?
Yeah, I had met Jan when I first came to Los Angeles. Like I said earlier, I visited him on the set for Basic Instinct, and then when he got his first project as a director, he asked me to shoot it. We had a meeting. That film fell apart. Then he got Speed, the Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock movie, and he sent me the script for it, and I had already agreed to do Stargate with Roland, which was kind of a given at that time that I shoot Roland's movies. So I couldn't do Speed. And I got to say, when I saw the movie, the script for Speed, I thought, how the hell is this going to work? It seemed like a crazy idea. A bus who can't go slower than 50 miles an hour, and then otherwise it blows up. And that's the movie. I thought, you can never do this. And I think the movie is fantastic. The chemistry between Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock is just amazing. And to me, that's one of the main things. I mean, I think you can do, that's a quintessential experience of successful filmmaking, is if you have leading characters that the audience can identify with, you can do a good movie. If you don't, the biggest film will crash and burn. It just doesn't matter what you do with the camera, with visual effects, with whatever, how much money you throw in. If the core element, if the people are not relatable, Independence Day without that cast would never work. I think that's the answer for Independence Day. It's really the cast and the human spirit amongst them. It's not blowing up the White House. So Jan got lucky there. I think he got the right mix on that film. The Haunting, in a way, was probably not very successful film because it didn't hit the right tone, I would say. I thought the sets were overwrought and way too big. When I first read the script, I thought, yeah, it's a little horror movie inside a house. Saw the sets, and it's like, it was so operatic and over the top. Yes, there was a lot of pressure because it was a big budget. It was a DreamWorks production, so Spielberg was a producer. There were some powerful people involved as well. And it wasn't scary enough, Horror film was never really my best genre, probably, but I think it needs to be more scary. They have these formulas that they try and repeat in all these smaller horror films that the audience expects. And this one was maybe too expensive for its own good. Jan is amazing to work with in terms of camera placement. I think he's one of the most talented cameramen who can make a moving camera shot. He doesn't really have a shot list, and he shoots very unconventional. And when we work together, two cinematographers working together, one directing, one shooting is not the easiest thing you would think, but then it's a matter of who does what. And I let him do the camera and I did the lighting. We had a fantastic camera operator, and the two of them, a lot of it is single camera, very complicated camera setups. It's all done for editing. He learned everything from Paul. That's what I discovered later. But he's also really, really good with that. He's great with crane shots. He's, he's a very talented guy, and then complicated. Okay. So he likes action, and sometimes he had some. No, it's fine. I wish he would have done some other. Would have had some more opportunities. I think later on it became a little harder for him to get his films off the ground. Making a good movie is a miracle, So many people try it all the time. How many films succeed to really hit all the bases and find an audience?
Yeah, it can be very difficult and extremely difficult. And in terms of The Haunting, I must say that I think many people dismissed it. Quote unquote dismissed it because of the special effects, but I just rewatched it maybe 3 days ago, and it does have a certain amount of creepy atmosphere. It could have been better in that department, but it wasn't a CGI overkill or effects overkill, which you get to see in today's world of films. So
that's true, yeah. That was time was ahead of its time. I don't know. But the tricky proposition is they try to make the house a character and visualize it, and that's where you cross the line between what people perceive as. I mean, realistic might be the wrong word in terms of a horror movie, but what people seem to, you lose the ground you stand on. A ceiling becomes a face. That's a hard proposition. And how do you do that digitally? It has that artifice to it. Maybe it would have been better to do it with mechanical effects. Like Coppola and Ballhaus shot that Dracula movie, and they used a lot of old-fashioned effects. That kind of grounded the film a little bit. So I don't know. And Phil Tippett, who did the effects, is a really smart, great guy, and he's really good with puppets as well and creatures and stuff. But yeah, there's moments in there where you just cross the line of what's believable, and once you cross that line, you'll never get it back.
But I was going to say there are some practical or quite a few practical effects also in The Haunting.
Sure. Yeah, and we had huge sets for it. I forgot there's the thing with the staircase that was so complicated. This double helix metal staircase that was built by Fraser. He's the top floor effects guy. The people that actually build stuff so it can collapse or do things. And that was amazing. That was in that greenhouse, the collapsing of that staircase. Quite a mechanical feat. Stuff like that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and it had a good cast too. At
least very good actors. Catherine, Owen Wilson was fun. Liam Neeson I worked with a couple of times. He's always great and a wonderful person. Yeah, no, it wasn't a bad experience. I'm just saying sometimes things get a little out of proportion, and I think that film was a bit out of proportion.
Yeah, it was shot when I think CGI effects became more prominent, and of course it's nothing compared to today's world, but especially in the late 90s and early 2000s they really had the chance to up the ante a lot with those effects, and nowadays there are just no boundaries at all. Can we talk a little bit about Narnia, or do you have to run?
No, it's okay. Yeah, still have some time.
Great.
Yeah, Narnia was a great opportunity. I knew the producer, Mark Johnson. I had done a small film with him. That was actually a lot of fun, called Banger Sisters. I always try to, after The Haunting, I always try to get a smaller film after a big one, so I wouldn't lose my fun in the original way of making movies without 20 producers and 100-day schedules. So I had done this little film with Mark, and then he suggested me for Narnia. There was a lot of famous colleagues who went up for it. And I think I got the job because I was the most enthusiastic. I hadn't done a big film like that in a while. So for me, it was a great opportunity to come back to something of that size. Andrew Adamson had only done one feature film with real live action. He came from visual effects and animation. So when I arrived for my interview, which apparently went so well that he said, "Hey, you want to see something?" He took me next door, and then he had his editor already sitting there at an editing bay and cutting together 3D storyboards, animated storyboards. I call that previs. So Andrew actually prevised almost the whole movie. They had a whole department of young VFX artists that did 3D storyboards, so he could cut to music already scenes, and he had the actors do voiceover for it, like in an animation movie. So there was an incredible amount of pre-planning. Partially, it certainly helped. Sometimes it was an absolute nightmare for me because we had to, with the A camera, kind of do what the previous computer camera had done, and a real camera works much more organic in a different way and moves different than a computer camera that goes very straight from A to B and maybe in a diagonal line. A crane moves much more in a curve, and the camera operator adds his own personal intuition to stuff. So sometimes we had some arguments about what's real and what's not. The film was a lot of fun to do in terms of scope and different worlds, countries we visited. We shot in New Zealand, which is one of the prettiest places I've been to, with amazing people there. And since Andrew is from there, he really wanted to take advantage of the beauty of New Zealand. So we had some tax incentives there and shot 2 or 3 months. We worked in New Zealand. We spent 6 months in Prague with a great crew. Amazing sets. What I like about genre films like that is that you, whether it's Halo or Stargate or Rob Roy or this, you get to really immerse yourself in something unique that doesn't look like the world right outside your window. That makes it tricky because you know, what does the moonlight look like in a fantasy movie? Can I push this or not? There's things you have to figure out. But you definitely create your own world, you know, from costume to every color gets controlled and decided, textures and stuff. And that's always a lot of fun, I think. The story was a little tricky because it's really a long travel journey with these big set pieces in the middle of it, battle scenes. I think the first Narnia movie probably had the better story. It was a little smaller, but easier to identify emotionally. But you know, having an opportunity to shoot it was great. Unfortunately, there was a strike right afterwards, so we all were out of work when it was done. But yeah, it was good.
And probably a huge undertaking also, with the enormous battle sequences. I mean, yeah. How much detail and preparation went into those? I mean, it's massive.
The logistics on that film were mind-boggling. I mean, we had very experienced first AD. We did very extensive location scouts, you know, finding the places for stuff. But it also had to fit into what's doable, what's feasible. You know, we looked at battlefields, I think, with different scouts all over the world. We ended up somewhere in the Czech Republic on some not so great field that was still reachable for the production. And then you have to bring in horses and stunt people and cable cams to fly the camera and you know, a lot of technical things. And we didn't overuse CG on that film. First of all, we didn't shoot much blue screen or green screen. A lot of stuff was done by doing the real action and then shooting plates, so that when you know, centaurs have horse legs, so they put different legs on performers with prosthetic masks that run through the field. They are on these funny blades that elevate the figure, and then later the legs get replaced in the computer. But where they had to paint stuff out, they had to find the right grass in the background. So I always had to shoot an empty plate right after we shot the main action. But we had a lot of horses, a lot of real performers. A friend of mine did the makeup stuff, Howard Berger, the prosthetics. They got up with a huge team at 3 a.m. to glue all this stuff on the faces and stuff. So a lot of it was done in camera in Rio. A huge castle set, I remember. That was probably the biggest set I've ever lit at night, with a drawbridge and a little village next to it. It was all built in the backlot at Barendorf Studios. So we had to really come up with big lighting solutions. I had a big crew mixed from England. My gaffer was the same guy I had on Rob Roy and the Jackal. And then I had a local crew in the Czech Republic. And a big second unit. That was people that worked on Lord of the Rings came from New Zealand to do a lot of second unit work. Yeah, big stuff. A lot of planning. We did location scouts where they would everybody would come in and be on the location, and then they would put maps and models of whatever structure was built right there on the field. I mean, it was really like we were designing skyscrapers or something. We built a bridge in Slovenia in some really remote little village where we couldn't even put up the crew because we were way too many people coming in there. And they would span lines across the river to show us where the sort of Roman wooden bridge would be. And then we got permission to put that in there and had to change the water flow of that river. This is crazy, really, when you think of it. At the end, the film got shown with the special film stock that Kodak had to produce for it. There was a certain release film stock, positive film stock, that had more silver to get better color and saturation and better blacks. It was a bit like Technicolor, the old Technicolor. And it was more expensive, but they had used that in animation films, and Andrew really loved it so much that he put it in his contract that this film would be released on Kodak Vision Premiere, and Kodak had to make the stock for us for 3,000 prints or something. It was crazy.
Before we wrap up for today, I need to at least mention some of the very cool comedies and great comedies which you shot. And One Night at McCool's, for instance, or Made in Manhattan, lovely rom-com. Guess Who, I think, is one of my favorites. He also did the Princess Diaries. So there's you have a big variety in your filmography, that's for sure.
Made in Manhattan, we took very serious. We prepped very thoroughly. Wayne Wang is a director who is very grounded in realism. So we looked at real hotel kitchens. We talked to people. We almost shot a whole little documentary in the preparation of how the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York works. And then we actually shot in there. There was a lot of preparation going into that. You don't succeed all the time, but you definitely try to create something that is identifiable and believable. Whether that's, Princess Diaries it's a pretty fantastic story in a way. And look, it wasn't something I thought I would be doing, but my wife said, no, people really like princesses. Go do it. And Gary Marshall is one of the nicest people I've ever worked with. But even that there is this young girl in San Francisco and her grandmother is just this queen in this little fantasy country. You have to make this believable, right? And that's part of my job too. There's this kind of balance between making people look good and still making the space and the world they live in real. And that's what you try. And hopefully you succeed. So I think all that stuff goes into movies. And Made in Manhattan, Jennifer Lopez working in a hotel, I think that's not something that's out of this world. That's something you can identify with.
Yeah.
One Night in McCool is actually one of the most underrated comedies. I think I thought it was hilariously funny. Unfortunately, it wasn't that successful. I thought it was a great cast. It was fun to do. very talented director who done mostly commercials.
And allow me one last question. I think you also shot the pilot of the Beverly Hills Cop series, which was directed by Barry Sonnenfeld. Whatever happened to that? Why wasn't that picked up? Was there any? I mean, there must have been a specific reason.
I don't know the specific reason. I have some thoughts about it, but it was a good shoot. We had a great crew in Los Angeles. Everybody was worried about Eddie Murphy, who came in for a few days, and he was fantastic, totally pro, knew his stuff, very friendly. So we had a good time. I think there were some casting issues, maybe, but I haven't done that many pilots. But this is the nature of what Hollywood does. They do a pilot to try stuff out, and then later they decide it's not in their best interest to make more out of it.
What's next for you?
I'm prepping two projects with Fatih Akim right now, a Turkish-German director from Hamburg. I'm super excited about it because he's a real filmmaker, who loves making movies and talk about movies. We did a little pre-shoot already. One project is one of the stories takes place in Amrum, the northern German island in the Second World War, and it's Hark Bohm's kind of youth story. He wrote the script and originally wanted to do it. He's a friend of ours.
Is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up?
No, I think we're good. I'm all talked out.
Yes, we managed to cover quite a lot of ground today. And Karl-Walter, I would like to thank you for taking so much time out of your schedule. You have been very generous with your time, and thank you very much. And I had
Thanks for having me.
I had a blast talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Sure, I did. Yeah.
Thank you
Okay.
very much. Take care.
Take
Bye.
care.